Emancipation of slavery in Vermont. The history of emancipation in Vermont is often told in one simple sentence. Vermont abolished slavery in 1777. That statement is broadly true, but it needs careful explanation. Vermont's legal rejection of slavery was remarkably early, especially when compared with other colonies or states. The transition from slavery to freedom in Vermont was not a single clean moment. It involved frontier settlement, individual African American families, legal language, inconsistent enforcement. In the mid-18th century, the region that became Vermont was not yet a colony. It was part of the contested New Hampshire grants, claimed by both New Hampshire and New York, and settled largely by settlers from New England. Slavery existed in New England, though on a smaller scale than in the South. Enslaved Africans and people of African descent worked in households, farms, taverns, and small businesses. In Vermont's case, the number was always small. But small numbers should not obscure the reality that slavery was present in the northern colonies as well. One of the most important people for understanding early black life in Vermont is Lucy Terry Prince. Born in Africa and enslaved as a child, Lucy Terry was taken to New England and lived for years in Deerfield, Massachusetts. She is remembered as the author of Barr's Fight, often identified as the earliest known poem by an African American individual. In 1756, she married Abijah Prince, a free black man, who had purchased her freedom. By the 1760s, the Prince family had moved into what became Vermont, where they became part of the complicated world of frontier landholding. Their story matters because it shows that black Vermonters were not merely passive recipients of emancipation. They built families, defended their rights, and used the courts when necessary. Lucy and Abijah Prince's experience also shows the limits of Vermont's egalitarian image. They were free people of color living in a society that still carried the prejudices and hostility of the era. Lucy Terry Prince became especially famous for defending her family's land rights. A Vermont historic marker notes that in 1803, her sons brought a land rights case that reached the Vermont Supreme Court, and Lucy continued pressing her family's claims as the widow of an original proprietor. Other accounts credit her with personally arguing before Vermont's High Court and impressing the judges with her ability. The legal turning point came in 1777 when Vermont, acting as an independent republic during the American Revolution, adopted its first constitution. Article 1 begins with the familiar natural rights language of the era. All men are born equally free and independent. The second clause, or the second sentence, declared that no male person, whether born in the country or brought from overseas, ought to be held by law as a servant, slave, or apprentice under the age of 21. No female could be so held after the age of 18, unless bound by consent or by law for debts, damages, fines, or similar obligations. That language made Vermont's constitution one of the earliest legal attacks on slavery in the British colonies. But it was not quite the same as saying that every enslaved person in Vermont became immediately free. Adult slavery was rejected, but the wording left room for minors who remained bound until adulthood. The language also blended slavery, apprenticeship, servitude, and debt obligations in a way that reflected 18th century labor law. In other words, Vermont's constitution was radical for the time period. The Constitution of 1777 for Vermont, unlike some northern states that later adopted gradual emancipation laws, protected existing slave owners. Vermont placed freedom in the language of natural rights. It connected anti-slavery to the founding principles of the new polity. The document's significance was magnified when Vermont entered the Union in 1791 as the 14th state. Vermont came in the United States with slavery already legally disfavored under its constitution. The 1790 federal census listed 16 enslaved individuals in Vermont. Vermont's legal principle was clear enough to make it famous, and the actual disappearance of bondage depended on enforcement and local practice during the era.